The WWF, what the world is watching. Turn it on and rip the knob off.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Wrestling Memory Grenade, episode 188, and I am feeling great because this week we begin discussing WrestleMania V, and as we prepare, I've got a lot of great guests upcoming here to discuss the actual event, but before we get to any of that, this is not the definitive edition for just any reason. We break it down from every aspect, including the business side, and as a fan, going back in time and remembering things. Not just from WrestleMania V, but against its competitor that aired the very same day. I'm talking Flair versus Steamboat, Clash of the Champions 6, Ragin Cajun. We're going to talk all about everything going on there and what transpired, what led to the Clash event competing against WrestleMania that day, trying to steal some buys away from WrestleMania. It may not be what you actually think it is that's causing all this, if you will. But in order to discuss all of that and so much more great memories of the time, we're going to welcome on to the Wrestling Memory Grenade program this week. He is WrestleCopia's own Jammie Jam Ward. Welcome to the Grenade, Jammie.
It's great to be back, Ray. It's not regional wrestling or the other ship, but I'm more than happy to be here with you.
Well, it's the granddaddy of them all here as far as WrestleCopia goes, though. It is the Wrestling Memory Grenade. And we kicked it all off nearly 6 years ago talking the NWA in 1989, and now we're talking the WWF in 1989. And we're coming across a very interesting track between the two companies because we're going to see two major events go down. And we've been talking about building up to WrestleMania V, but I discussed Clash 6 all those years ago. And today we're going to talk a little bit about both, and we're going to talk about what was going on behind the scenes and fan memories as well. We got a lot to jump into, but it's going to be a fun time, Jammie.
Me and you together is always a fun time, Ray.
We tried to make it fun anyway. If nobody else is having fun time, we're having a fun time. So get with the program, people. Yes, absolutely. So I'll take you back. First of all, Jammie Ward is an OG tape trader. For those of you who are unaware, he was one of the originals out there, just kind of learning all the different territories, all the different talent. And what year did you start watching wrestling again, Jammie?
I started watching as a regular viewer in '78.
Okay.
Right after I got, my neighbor got cable television. I was watching the Spectrum shows over his house. But I kind of started jumping in and out around 75, 76, but nothing hardcore like I was in 78.
We've talked at length about your history, your memory of Georgia Championship Wrestling, Mid-South Wrestling, of course, the WWF up there in the New York territory, if you will, Philadelphia, technically, with you. But and of course, Crockett starts running up in Philadelphia. And I know that you went to quite a few of those events as well. You even may have chauffeured around the boys. That might not be the correct term, but you had a good time there at Ribbits and things of that nature.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I made friends with Dennis Coraluzzo through Tom Robinson, and became friends with Jim Cornette, the Midnight Express, and we all used to go back to the Ribbit restaurant after the NWA cards at the Civic Center. Yeah, I attended every NWA card at the Civic Center from the beginning in '85 up through early 1990.
I don't know if Jim Cornette listens to this program. I'm going to go with no on that. But at the same time, you told me something very interesting recently on the Unreeled program, on the Big Ones program. We were covering Clash 9, New York Knockout, with Ric Flair and Terry Funk over there. And you had mentioned you attended backstage Halloween Havoc 89. And we had you shared some fun stories there from an altercation between the Great Muta and Lex Luger, all the way down to the fact that somewhere along the lines you were informed that there was a turn coming at Clash 9 by the one and only Racket Swinger. And I thought that was, I got a kick out of that he exposed the, Mr. Kayfabe himself was, he had some little trust in you there, Jammie Ward, to spill the beans that the Dynamic Dudes were going to get their comeuppance.
Yeah, well, the group that, I was with was Tom Robinson, Des Corluzzo, Frank Chili, Jeff Otto, and we were the same guys going every single month. And from the first time I ever met Jim Cornette, he knew who I was already. Oh, you're Jammie Ward. I know you from the newsletters and
Right.
tape trading. So he knew who I was. So he was already comfortable with me being there, along with the other guys, because I was the last one kind of to join that little crowd. And he spoke very freely, as did all the other wrestlers. Nobody was trying to kayfabe anybody at those dinners.
But they blame it all on Vince, right? He ruined it.
Yeah.
But okay. Well, no, that's excellent. I kind of wanted to set the stage to get everybody an idea of, your background as a super fan, obviously, but also as a smart fan. You were doing the newsletter scene way before the Observer. Even you probably got a few newsletters, I'm assuming, the fanzines, as some people call them, the bulletins and things like that. And you think you even kind of started up your own at one point, did you not?
Yes, I did. I started it in late '83 and ran through like 1990. It was called the Squared Circle.
Squared Circle. You still got a copy of all those laying around somewhere in a stack?
I have a few. I should have kept them all, but I didn't. I have a few of them that
priorities, man. I get it.
I kept over the years. Yeah,
I get it. I get it. There's a lot of things I wish I still had as well. But all right, guys, we're going to jump into those. Those are just kind of some of the accolades, the allocades, whatever you want to call it. Lex Luger would call it anyway. As we jump into this fun time period. What a time to be a wrestling fan. Whether you loved wrestling and you got Steamboat and Flair on one channel, or you loved everything else about this, the drama and the pageantry, the entertainment pal side of it, WrestleMania 5. So going into this, Jammie, now people might not know that you attended not just you went to WrestleMania 4 and you went back to the boardwalk for WrestleMania 5, and you've told this story, and I'm going to let you tell it here too, but tell them Jammie Ward's story about making the trip down there once again to WrestleMania, and then how quickly you got back home to watch the Clash.
Yeah. When we went for WrestleMania 4, my dad and I took a casino bus, because they always ran casino buses from the Philly area to AC. But this time around, we drove. And we got down there 11, 12 o'clock, because the show didn't start, I think, till 3 or 4 in the afternoon.
4 o'clock, I believe, yeah.
We walked the boardwalk. We got something to eat and everything. We parked underneath the Trump Casino next door, and it was an easy, got in, watched the show. And then as soon as the show was over, my dad and I hit the parking lot and just hit the timing perfectly. And we were home by, the show ended around 8-ish. We were home no later than 10 p.m. Okay. At which point, my mom had recorded the Clash of Champions that afternoon for me, as she did the previous year head-to-head battle. And I got home and immediately popped that thing back into VCR and watched Ragin Cajun.
It's funny you mentioned that, to bring that up. You attended WrestleMania, and your mom, good old Mama Ward, she was always there for Jammie. So was Papa Ward. I mean, hey, you get to take a trip down with your dad to go watch WrestleMania. That's good times, man. So you come back home, but notably, there are two of the biggest events at that time in wrestling history going down on the same date, and people begin to wonder, why would somebody do such a thing? And that's going to take us back. And the answer might surprise a lot of people when we actually get to the real reason why it happened. But we're going to go back first and talk about the fiasco, the issues between Vince McMahon and Ted Turner, which actually technically go all the way back to when Vince took over the Georgia Championship Wrestling time slot. And we've covered a lot of Georgia, Jammie, but from the early 80s, when everything was right in the world, Jim Barnett, Ole Anderson, Ted Turner, et cetera, was letting them, they were running the show on there, no problems. Later on, of course, Vince McMahon would purchase the rights. The stories are out there. Bob Roop has talked about it. We've discussed this many a time, but basically Vince takes over the TBS slot, Black Saturday, way back in July of 1984. And supposedly he had promised to continue to run wrestling matches in the studio, something the fans had always seen. And we love, we call it all the time on regional wrestling. But Vince immediately throws to arena matches, right? And so I'm gonna go back, and that's kind of what starts it. Mr. Turner's not happy. He's getting a lot of calls about it. The fans aren't happy. The Georgia fans aren't happy. Let's go back to 1984. Jammie Ward's thoughts when he saw this unfolding.
Well, I knew it was going to happen because I was, reading the newsletters at the time. Just not who was light years ahead of most other people, but some of the other bulletins that I called them bulletins, not newsletters back then. Good. They were talking about Vince was ready to take over, that it was in the hands of the courts, and it was just a matter of time. So I didn't know he was taking over that particular day, But it was inevitable that one of these weeks he was going to pop up on Georgia TV. And when he did, I was kind of taken back because the crowd was awfully quiet when Freddie introduced Vince McMahon. And then I found out real quick why. It was going to be, it was arena matches. Now, I still held out hope that this was just like a 1-week transition.
An introduction, right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. They didn't have time to get any wrestlers down there and actually produce anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I had hopes for the next week. But when the show continued the same way, and then I started getting word that they weren't going to do live matches, I was highly disappointed. I was expecting Georgia Championship Wrestling presented by the World Wrestling Federation, and I was very disappointed.
Happen. Yeah,
no.
I mean, it's just a rehash of stuff that you could see in the other markets and things like that for Vince McMahon, and he had a specific idea of what he wanted to do, and he didn't want that studio wrestling, pal. Unfortunately, now. Ted Turner became very upset. I don't know. I wasn't part of the negotiations. I've never seen the contracts. I don't know exactly what Vince claimed he was going to do and didn't do. But obviously we know up until the final 5 weeks of the WWF's run there on TBS, they did not bring us studio wrestling. Then all of a sudden, magically, with 5 weeks left heading into WrestleMania 1, to the build to WrestleMania, they begin airing studio matches here. I mean, it took, 6, 7, 8 months at least to get him to do that. Now we know what's going to happen. We'll talk about that in a minute, but there was a lot of issues going on behind the scenes politically between Vince and the owner of the station, Ted Turner.
Yeah, well, Ted claims that Vince, when he purchases it, has to live by the contract that Ole and Barnett, even though Barnett was long gone, he was supposed to live by that contract that said live studio wrestling each week, or at least a tape studio show out of the WTBS studios. And that didn't happen, because Vince claimed, no, that's not the way the contract read. That all ended up in court, and I think it got settled right before they did that 5-week run. But as, fate had it, that 5-week run was basically just to help promote WrestleMania anyway.
Yeah, it was a big infomercial.
Exactly, that's all it was, because they actually brought in Mr. T, Roddy Piper, Paul Orndorff. They brought in the heavy hitters, but not to wrestle. They had Les Stewart against Mr. Wrestling 2 as like the top thing, or Tony Russo working an enhancer match, name that we all recognize and love.
It was really weird because it felt like the wrestling matches were the commercials, and the commercials, the promos were the wrestling, as far as those studio shows go, because it was like throw whoever the hell showed up, throw them in the ring so we can get back to Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda to promote WrestleMania. That's the way it felt to me, because every time you come in and out of the matches had no merit. They didn't even discuss the matches outside of the matches actually happening in the ring. And then we would come back and it's like, okay, guys, let's get back to this WrestleMania thing. And you would see the ads. And I mean, it was everywhere. If you didn't know what WrestleMania was, you did those last 5 weeks on TBS. I mean, it was very masterful craftsmanship by Vince. And then we know the story. Vince sells the TBS slot to Crockett for $1 million. A lot of people say he parlayed that, into making WrestleMania, although I think you would have had to spend a few bucks beforehand to have the show the magnitude of WrestleMania. But tomato, it is what it is. It all works out. And Crockett takes over. He pushes out some of the Georgia guys that have been working for Ole, because Crockett morphs with Ole, kind of joins in with that as well. So he secures himself a job. Makes sense. I mean, Ole's been there forever. But guys like the Sawyers and Bob Roop and guys like that had been Georgia boys, they were on the way out. And so now we're off to the races. Crockett's got TBS, Vince has the USA Network, and things go on for quite a while. And then all of a sudden, Vince McMahon takes over the pay-per-view market, not just for wrestling, but one of the highest grossing period pay-per-view, because pay-per-view in the 80s was still in its infancy. People were figuring it out. There were a lot of concerts on pay-per-view in the 80s until they figured out people don't want to pay to watch a concert. So they weren't making a whole lot of money off those concerts, but they tried a lot of things on pay-per-view throughout the 1980s, but Vince was one of the most successful. And so the pay-per-view companies go, this guy's it. He's Mr. Entertainment. He's WrestleMania 3, Andre Hulk, they draw a crap load of buys. And so Vince kind of takes over the market at that point. And Jim Crockett goes, I want to do that thing too. I want to do the pay-per-view thing too. And he, Starrcade, the granddaddy of them all as far as pay-per-views go, wrestling big events go, that annually starts back in 1983. He's going to bring it in 1987. Of course, the tradition was Starrcade was on Thanksgiving night, which was the largest drawing night in the South. typically for a wrestling event. So it all makes sense. And then, well, Jamie, I'll let you tell them what Vince decided he was going to do.
Well, since Mr. Crockett wanted to do Thanksgiving night, and he wants to come and play with the big boys, to steal a line from Crockett himself, Vince decides, you know what? I don't want to share. I want the whole thing to myself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invent my own pay-per-view for Thanksgiving night. And I think, and since we're battling it out with Ted here over things, because he doesn't respect Crockett, he's still calling it Ted Turner Wrestling at that point.
Right.
He says, I'm going to call it the Survivor Series because only one of us is going to survive after
Only
this.
the strong will survive, yes.
And it will be me. So to make matters even more complicated, so now all these cable systems have 2 pay-per-views lined up for the same night. And as you said, pay-per-view was in its infancy at this point. And actually, when I was a senior in high school, I did a oral report about pay-per-view was going to be the next big thing in entertainment. Like you said, based on concerts and how they thought that was going to revolutionize the concert viewing. And it never really panned out that way. But wrestling, as soon as Vince had the first WrestleMania was in limited markets on pay-per-view, and that went over real well. So he followed it up, was it October, November of 85 with the Wrestling Classic. And while it wasn't a huge success, it still did good numbers. And then WrestleMania 2, that came out on a lot of pay-per-view along with Closed Circuit, and he did well there. So Vince now, he has it going. He gets to WrestleMania 3, and that just hit big time because now pay-per-views even expanded more. So now it's time. You know what? I don't want to share. Mr. Cable Company, you either air mine or you won't air any more of mine. Yeah. And that's not the way to make money if you're the pay-per-view company. You're going to go with the newcomer on the block, or you're going to go with the established guy that's going to bring you more money. And a lot of cable systems did not carry Starrcade. They only carried that first night of Survivor Series.
Well, you see, I mean, Mr. Education here, thank you so much for the history lesson, Jammie Ward. I loved it. I couldn't have done it any better, so we really appreciate, bringing your insight into this. And you lived it, man. You kind of experienced this going on, and you were getting the bulletins, the newsletters of the time as well. So you got to follow some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that, everybody else was just kind of watching on TV going. But yeah, Crockett wound up getting a very small amount of markets, of course, in the Carolinas and things of that nature in regards to Starrcade 87. So he was already losing coming out of the gate. A lot of people also blame that he was trying to get big for his britches there, moving Starrcade, which had been a homegrown event, up into Chicago, which was just kind of a peculiar choice to do as well. So Crockett shot himself in the foot, but Vince really just finished the job, I feel like. And then we fast forward 2 months later, Crockett's already got himself another pay-per-view. So talk about ambition, right? It's like we're coming around on Starrcade. Now we got the Bunkhouse Stampede. We're coming back to pay-per-view, a 2-hour special this time. And what does Vince do here? He can't run another pay-per-view. He didn't have it in the works. So what does Vince do this time, Jamie?
Well, he goes to his right-hand men at the USA Network, who he's been, going back to his father. They've been working with the USA Network since its inception in 1979, airing Madison Square Garden shows and the occasional show from the Cap Center or even the Meadowlands or Nassau Coliseum. They would air the occasional shows. And they had All-American Wrestling, which in questionable circumstances took away from Joe Blanchard. That's another story that we'll get to in 1983 on the Ultimate tier. Right. But then in the beginning of 85, where's it 84? He comes up with the Monday Night Show, not Raw.
Tuesday Night Titans.
Right, Tuesday Night Titans, which was a 2-hour show in the beginning. And that was 1984, May of 84. Yeah. That jogs my memory. And then they come out, which was, the talk show thing, which was very successful. And then in 85, help me right, the Monday Night Show. Primetime wrestling, which, same as Georgia Championship Wrestling. It's all arena matches, but with Monsoon and Jesse Ventura. Yeah,
Monsoon. It was Jack Reynolds for a bit. Yeah,
Reynolds first,
then,
right.
Yeah, Gorilla would take over pretty quickly. They're about 8 months in.
So what I'm trying to establish here is the USA Network and Vince McMahon were thick as thieves because it was the highest rated show on the USA Network was all his wrestling shows. I mean, they were just showing like repeats of different
arena shows, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So he goes to the USA Network and says, "Hey, listen, I have a revolutionary idea. I want to air a special on your network on the same night as this Bunkhouse Stampede." I want to say it was like January
8th, might be 15th. It's got a couple numbers running around in my head. Yeah.
But I want to put a big extravaganza. Give me 2 hours. Well, they open the window. There he goes. Go ahead, Vince. There's your 2 hours. And thus the invention of the Royal Rumble.
And of course, the story there is Vince hated the idea. He thought it was stupid when Pat Patterson pitched it to him. So Pat went and pitched it to Dick Ebersol, the head guy over there at NBC, who was the producer of all the Saturday Night's main events back in the day. And Ebersol loved the idea. And if you look at the credits, Dick Ebersol is credited as producing the Royal Rumble. So you have to wonder if Ebersol throwing his name out there to the USA Network also got Vince that, abruptly got him that time slot. Was, hey, man, I got Dick Ebersol here. He's working with me, pal. We're going to put on this show. And, the story goes, Vince thought it was the Rumble idea. The concoction of the Rumble itself was a terrible idea. And Ebersol loved it. He goes, it's great TV. Every 2 minutes, you don't know what's going to, happen next. People are going to stay tuned in. So Ebersol was a TV guy. He knew what would keep people, glued in. So he thought it was a fantastic idea. And of course, here we are this many years later, and the Royal Rumble is still one of the most over things every year, whether it's booked well or not. That's another story. But in between all of this, and I don't want to leave it out, this is where the cable companies, after the whole Survivor Series Starrcade deal, the cable companies go back because they didn't like being put in that position where Vince is giving them an ultimatum and they have to choose. They went to both parties and said, never again, never, ever again will both of you ever come to us and try to run a pay-per-view on the same day, or we're not going to deal with either one of you. And so that was pretty much the deal up until this point here in 89 we never saw that again. Basically, Starrcade moved to December, and, Vince kept the Thanksgiving night tradition there for quite a while before he took it and moved it around. But the story starts there as far as the Turner, the Vince, the war. Starrcade was actually Crockett, not necessarily Turner, but Vince, like you said, viewed it as Turner because Turner was in there somewhere moving around. And of course, all of this shoots Jimmy Crockett in the foot to the point where he's and Lear jets and God knows what else he was spending money on. But so he's
UWF.
There you go, that too. So all of this. And Crockett, obviously, we know by October of 88, he has to sell to Turner. Turner takes over, legally owns what would become WCW. And that's what we're kind of slowly moving into here now. But, it's funny, too. You go back to WrestleMania IV, though, and you talked about it there. They run against each other pay-per-views in November of 87. Vince puts on a free show on the USA Network, Royal Rumble, up against the Bunkhouse Stampede program in January of 88. And then we move ahead to WrestleMania 4 in 1988. And over on the other side, if you can do that whole free TV thing while I got a pay-per-view, and I can do that too, because again, Ted Turner is right here. So Turner, buddies with Crockett, and he hates Vince. That doesn't hurt anything. Turner decides, we'll give you some time. And that's how we have the invention of, which program was that?
The Clash of Champions.
Clash of the Champions. That's it, man. So, WrestleMania 4, Randy Savage, 4 matches, the grueling night, a tournament to be crowned the WWF champion. You were there for that. So I got to ask you, did Mama Ward record Clash of the Champions for you as well? The first one?
Yes, she did.
Wow.
Yes, she did. And I will say both nights, when I got home, after the casino bus ride was much later, it had to be 11 or midnight by the time we got home, I popped it in and was still to work at 7 the next morning.
All right, very cool. Well, that's good stuff, man, to kind of go back and look at the competition. And this kind of sets the stage for where we're going right now. So the pay-per-view company said you guys can't run against each other, so they start using their local cable networks to run against each other and give away free wrestling. If you have cable, it's free. Free wrestling versus having to pay for the pay-per-view. So anybody who might be on the fence like, I really got to see some wrestling, but it's free over here. So not the diehard fan or somebody that's really glued to one particular company. They go, it's wrestling. So there you go. I can see me, this didn't happen, but I can see me. Please let me get WrestleMania. Please and then my grandpa changed. Oh, there's wrestling on. Here you go. Just watch this, boy, and throw it on the controller. And there I go. Now I got my free wrestling. Clash 6 is what we're coming to here. But, it's funny, even looking earlier here this year, they were talking about doing the primetime special, 3-hour special, face-to-face to run up against Turner.
Chi-Town Rumble.
Yeah. So it's petty, but it's competitive. It's business at the end of the day. But so when you look at this for what it is, and you see that WrestleMania 5 is running up against Clash of the Champions 6, you think the boys are at it again. But that's not the circumstances here. This is not well, it is a Ted Turner call, but it wasn't like Ted was sitting back and going, I'm going to go fuck with this guy. Yeah, yeah. And that's my Ted Turner voice from wrestling. That's what I was taught from the WWF, by the way, in 96. So I don't really have a Ted Turner voice. But so I went back and I got some information. I actually got it from a business magazine from 1989. And of course, I took some notes as well from Dave Meltzer, Wrestling Observer. And so here's the story of why WrestleMania 5 and Clash of the Champions 6 ran up against each other on this fateful night, April 2, 1989. WWF Titan Sports wanted cable companies, all of the pay-per-view companies that they were working with, to guarantee money equivalent to a 7% buy rate, or the WWF stated they would not allow WrestleMania to air on their pay-per-view networks, on these cable networks. So that triggered pushback, and Viacom, the Viacom cable company, contacted other cable companies and said, can you believe what this Vince McMahon guy's trying to do? Because he'd already cornered the market on the pay-per-views, and now he's like making these insane demands. They said, we got to put a stop to this before it gets any, more out of control. So these cable companies get together and they call Ted Turner. And in 1987, they said, you better never run against each other ever again. We're not playing this game. Now they are begging Ted Turner, we need you to do us a favor, Ted. Can you create a pay-per-view and put it up against WrestleMania 5 so that we have the option to go with the other pay-per-view that day? We want to teach Vince McMahon a lesson. Isn't that interesting? I mean, all this weird business stuff going on behind this. A lot of people think it was just Ted Turner's turn to screw with Vince, but that was not the case at all.
No, and you know what? Thank you, because I totally forgot about that. You just triggered memories right there. I remember that being the big story at the time. It was the Revenge of the Jedi, so to say. Striking back out against Vince, yeah. Like myself, I didn't even have pay-per-view capabilities. I wouldn't get that until, I think, 1990 on my personal cable system. But yeah, I remember that being a real big controversy. They had enough of Vince trying to all of a sudden strong-arm them and taking, a bigger cut.
Right, and they don't just go to Ted Turner and say, hey, here's an idea. They say, we need you to do this. We want you to do this. We are promising that we will air your event and we will support and advertise for your pay-per-view, Ted. That's kind of crazy when you think about it. That's pay-per-views now. Vince was always very aggressive in business and beyond, right? So he comes in and he's demanding, I want 7% guaranteed. I'm going to get paid this much because I know my company's going to do this. He was expecting a big payday because of the Mega Power storyline. He saw it for what it was. He knew what it was going to do. It had done the best numbers, I think, on NBC leading into, other than the Battle Royal, maybe, the Battle Royal show before WrestleMania 3 that they did, where Andre tosses Hulk. I think that might have had a higher number, but I mean, and of course the main event, we know the main event was like skyrocket through the roof as far as ratings go, but they were doing really well selling this pay-per-view for Hulk and Savage. Everything else just kind of felt like an afterthought to some degree, whether, it just did. And so these cable companies, I don't know how Vince got wind of it. I don't really have any information on that. I don't know if, he had some people in business that told him about it. I don't know if this cable company went back to Vince and told him hey, guess what? Ted Turner. Apparently Vince backs down, which does not happen very often, but I think he's a smart businessman. I think that's why he made his money. He's a smart businessman at the end of the day. He may make bad decisions and he may not have the best booking at all times, but when it comes to finances, he is a genius to make it as far as he did. And he goes, you know what, guys? Never mind. I was just kidding, pal. I don't need that whole 7%. And so the cable companies, rather than continuing to support Ted Turner, their business. Okay, that's cool. We'll stick with WrestleMania. Now Ted's over here left holding the bag. Luckily, he's a billionaire, whatever he was back then. So he can afford this. I would call it a loss because now you've booked the Superdome, Jamie. You've booked the Superdome for a pay-per-view.
Yeah, I mean, that's not cheap rent. But if you look back at the Bill Watts time, maybe they got a Bill Watts deal on that particular show because it was far from sold out. And not a lot of Watts' stuff drew much more than 15 or 20,000 for the last so many years.
Right.
So I don't think it was that big of a deal that they, went and got the Superdome. I'm sure that they had a sweet deal on it. It wasn't that big of an issue. They made it very dark, so you couldn't see all the empty seats in there. That's for sure.
You could look at it that way. I look at it like they were just cheap with the lighting, and it just happened to work out in their favor.
Yeah, probably. But hey, the cable companies were, as you were just saying, Ted Turner was at the infancy of cable television.
Yes.
When it started in the early 70s, and he got his WTCG,
maybe?
Something like that. And he got on all those cable systems that were just starting up.
Yeah.
And he was the legit first superstation.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have it at the time, but he was all over the place in 1978 and 79 as, cable was growing. And TBS helped all these cable systems become big time.
Right. Yeah, he was Mr. Cable. I mean, he didn't run the cable companies, but he was there basically he was a pioneer of the cable industry because he created cable stations. Because of his success, all he had to do was go, yeah, we're creating this channel. It's called CNN. Done. I mean, there wasn't really a lot of question behind it with Ted, and he had the money to back it up. Obviously, that helped matters. But it's this is just so funny because had this happened, had Vince not backed down, he would have been in a scattered few smaller cable stations, and I read that he would have lost more than half of his money. Had they went through with it this way, like $9-10 million, he would have been out back in this era. That's a huge part of the entire gate as far as your finances, what you're going to bring out of this. And so for Vince to back down, it tells you that he knew. He might have known walking in. Oh, let's just see what happens. Shits and giggles, pal. Let's see what and it doesn't hurt to ask, I suppose, but. Man, they go to Ted Turner, they say, we need you to create a pay-per-view on this date. And he goes, pay-per-view? Okay, we're going to make it big. We're going to put it in New Orleans. We're going to put it in the Superdome. It's going to be a big pay-per-view. They're going to, I don't know when they came up with the idea or when this actually transpired. But, Steamboat and Flair on top. So you're coming in guns blazing here to compete with Vince McMahon. And then at some point, Vince backs down and they just go back to Ted Turner and go, yeah, you know what, that pay-per-view thing, we're just going to stay with Vince. And so you have to figure that Ted would be a little trepidatious moving forward dealing with the cable companies.
Well, yes and no, but because Ted, again, is an icon in that business. So him personally, he probably wasn't affected mentally that much by it. However, Jim Hurd and I forget what the other guy who
George Scott was booking.
George Scott was booking, but there was another guy along with Jim Hurd that were the on-camera guys that were in charge of it. Neither one of those guys could have been too thrilled about, throwing balls to the wall and putting it on one of the greatest cards people were ever going to see, and then just kind of having it snaked out from underneath them. Because the card they put on is a solid card,
yeah.
But I don't think this is what they were originally planning when they first heard about it. I think they were going much stronger.
I would have been curious to see what they would have went with because I saw George Scott's pay-per-view and they didn't go much stronger, so I don't know, that's another problem in itself is George Scott. So luckily for Turner, he just happens to own some cable channels. So he's like, oh, well, we already have the Superdome booked, but we're not on pay-per-view. What can we? All right, we'll do another one of those Clash things instead, an additional Clash. So this becomes Clash 6, Ragin Cajun. Of course, Steamboat and Flair headlines, so everything else is just the icing at that point, really, on the card. But not a very sound card, very lackluster. But I go back, this was George Scott's booking. I mean, I broke this down week to week to week. And this was, nothing changed except for the fact that George Scott lived in the 1970s, the 1960s, as far as booking an event or promoting an event goes. And so here we go. We're going into April 2, and it's WrestleMania and Clash of the Champions, or as they called it on TBS up until the weekend of, that show coming on Sunday night. That's what they'd never named it. Other than the bumpers in and out of the commercial breaks, the advertising bumpers, never did you hear the words Clash of the Champions uttered on TV until the weekend of the event.
Interesting. I don't remember back to the regular, TV shows. So I don't remember whether they did or didn't, but that is interesting to hear they never did. It was only on the bumpers that they advertised.
If you didn't watch those bumpers, you would not have known. I mean, that's why that's why the viewership is down. That's why there's 5,300 people in the Superdome for Flair and Steamboat. There was just no promotion because George Scott lived by this old school motto that if I promote this and people watch this on TV, they won't come to my house shows and pay to watch it again, which is silly because it's Flair and Steamboat. But at the same time, he fails to realize the guy that owns this wrestling company owns the TV channel that it's airing on. So you're double screwing Ted Turner here, George Scott, because not only are you trying to keep people from watching your wrestling show, which Ted owns, but on his channel in which his advertisers are paying for the commercials and things of that nature. So, I mean, the day of Clash 6, I don't think that, it's a mystery why George Scott was finally terminated. Not soon enough, but terminated from the company.
Well, I got this from good authority.
Okay.
A lot of the guys in the company thought George Scott was sent there by Vince.
Yeah, I've heard that.
To tear it down. And with some of the booking that he did, they were convinced that, when Vince talked him into approaching TBS to try to get that Booker job. And I think even Jim Crockett stuck his neck out for him and said, yeah, you should hire this guy as a booker. Well, when does he get relieved of that duty exactly? Do you remember?
The day of the Clash.
Okay, right
Clash
after
6.
the Clash?
I've heard it's the morning of.
Oh, the morning of.
Because of the tickets and because of everything that was going on. I mean, I've heard both, but more credible seems to be the before the event. But I've also heard directly after the event. So sometime during April 2.
Because right after this is when the NWA and TBS, the rest of '89 becomes legendary.
Yes.
With the build into the Wrestle War, Flair Steamboat 3 with the 3 judges, which I should almost forgot. That they flew in for a dinner the night before, all the living NWA champions.
Right, yeah.
And Sam Munchnick. I forgot Terry Funk called the play-by-play for Flair Steamboat until, I just rechecked it out. So getting rid of George Scott was the best thing that it could do because business just took off and didn't die until Sting blows his knee out.
Yeah, people say the booking committees don't work, but they worked short term at the very least. Because if you start watching for the time, it takes a little bit to get through the TV, but say by the end of April, all the way through the summer, I mean, it's just hot booking. Everybody's got a program because everybody's booking. So they're all booking themselves into programs. So we got tons of great stuff going on. We got Funk feuding with Sting, but Funk feuding with, also Muta feuding with Sting. We had all kinds of cool, great, fun stuff on Worldwide, on Pro, on everything, really, in 1989. It was a great year to be an NWA fan if you guys were watching all the different TV like I was. And of course, I didn't have a clue what the hell a booker was, much less who was booking at the time. But going back in hindsight, it makes sense now why everybody had a program, though, because everybody was booking their own program. Because, Cornette comes in and replaces Eddie there later on as well in the booking committee. Right.
Yeah, because Eddie had just debuted Missy into the act, and he's teaming with Steiner. And, Missy was very nice back then. And she wasn't as psycho as she ends up being either. She was actually kind of level-headed. But yeah, once, Scott goes, it just turns around.
So a lot of people, for a lot of years, myself included many years ago, when I first heard of the whole Turner, Vince McMahon ordeal back in the 1990s, when I became, old enough and got into the internet, 95, 96, and, started acquiring some observers and things and learning, I myself for many years figured, well, you know what, this is the feud continues on, but apparently it was more so the cable companies or pay-per-view companies trying to screw with Vince McMahon because he was making his demands were unreasonable. And they said, that's okay, because we realize there's competition. And so we'll just go back your competition. And Vince says, well, now, wait a minute, let's not be hasty, pal. And so here we go, and WrestleMania continues on pay-per-view, and Clash 6 that's why it's Clash 6, and I feel like a lot of people never realize that, and so I thought it was important to kind of flesh all this out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. A lot of times you got to explain the past to understand the future, and we're not that far away from another big head-to-head between Vince and Ted Turner.
Yeah, it just continues on, and then we know it's going to continue on till the end, pretty much.
Up through 2001.
One of those companies is going away eventually, but not for quite a while.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at uswapodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell back to talk to you about all the new and exciting audio and video podcasts we've been putting together over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. As a self-funded brand, this entire ship is powered by our patrons. It's your support that keeps all of these wonderful shows going here at WrestleCopia. And with that said, I wanted to mention that we now have 3 major tiers with tons of Patreon-exclusive next-level content for our Patreon supporters. And it all starts with the $5 all-access tier, which gets you early access to many of the weekly podcasts, at least a dozen monthly digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure, the insanely detailed show notes for the Wrestling Memory Grenade Regional Wrestling, and the OG Monday Warfare podcast, plus random bonus video drops, archived old-school audio watch-alongs from the early years of the brand. And if that's not all, the brand new Patreon-exclusive podcast, Ranting Raw, featuring yours truly, Ray Russell, completely uncensored, unfiltered, with honest takes, taking patron questions and addressing various topics from throughout wrestling history. It is a whole lot of fun wrapped under the all-access tier for only $5, but things get even hotter with the VIP Superfan tier. For just a few dollars more, you get everything already mentioned in the all-access tier, plus as part of the VIP tier, a whole new slew of videocast series where it's not just your typical watch-alongs. Sure, we laugh, we have fun, but we're also breaking down the history, the context, and the why behind what you're seeing. And as part of the VIP tier, you have access to Dan Gennety's Pro Resu Academy videocast, the Coliseum videocast with co-host Gene Jackson, and the Monday Warfare videocast, Raw vs. Nitro, breaking down the history of the Monday Night War. Plus, you also get the Memphis 1985 folder of goodies and all show notes for the Pro Academy podcast and Gene's retro review show. Lots to be had there at the VIP tier. But wait, there's more. For those WrestleCopia backers who crave even more from the brand, we bring you yet another level of content fit for a warrior, because it is indeed the ultimate tier, which gives you everything from the all-access pass, everything from the VIP tier, plus you will receive access to the big ones, video series, featuring a lengthy look and discussion into some of the biggest pay-per-views, super shows, and other events from throughout wrestling history. It's also a great place to keep up with the big events that coincide with the Monday Warfare videocast and so many other big events from years gone by. You'll also have access to the newest big hit to the Copia brand. I'm talking about Regional Wrestling Unreal, the video series. Get ready for the next level in regional wrestling as we dissect territory history in video form. Watch along with us. But still, even more for your money, guys. You'll also receive access to the Treasure Chest, which offers patrons the unique opportunity to download and watch select rarities from wrestling history. And for those of you who are wondering what we offer, are contemplating joining a paid Patreon membership, or simply a curious lurker, a reminder there's a free tier at our Patreon that you can join as well. Remember, guys, no subscription, cancel any time, but I think you'll like the content that we're offering there for any budget you may have. And you can sign up right now, patreon.com/WrestleCopia, or look for the QR code where available. We appreciate your support in helping us pay the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network running and enabling us to continue to bring you all the quality programming that we offer.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/WrestlePod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, wherever we go, whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.
So let's go back, Jamie. I'm going to take you back to that fateful day. We're going to go back actually first because WrestleMania 5 is our topic. We're going to start with Clash 6, and it was a loaded show, but again, it was that George Scott booking of just throw a bunch of guys out there. Now, it was very interesting what George Scott was able to do because George Scott had his boys. Every booker has their boys. George Scott brought Steamboat over from Crockett. Of course, Steamboat wasn't happy about Dusty coming in and booking anyway, baby. But, you know, Steamboat, you see him jump over it. Now George Scott is here, who immediately returns to... Ricky Steamboat had not wrestled a single match since WrestleMania 4, which you saw live. So you saw Steamboat's final match with the WWF, where he shockingly does the job to Greg Valentine. Still, I didn't understand that for many years until I realized, oh, well, he was leaving.
And they're old friends.
Yeah, I mean, they go way back. I get that. But it's where Greg Valentine was on the card, it just blew my mind at the time.
Well, in other words, what I'm trying to get across is he may not have done the honors for very many.
Right.
Except for somebody like a Greg Valentine, because they've known each other since 1974, 75.
I gotcha. So it's kind of interesting because two guys, actually, their final matches in the business for the rest of 88 were Butch Reed and Ricky Steamboat. They both go into retirement. I know Reed had a million nagging injuries before he even got to the WWF. So he goes and does, imagine this. You take off of wrestling because you've got 100 injuries and you go off to do rodeo. Something ain't right there, you know?
And he wasn't the rodeo clown either.
No, God, no, man. I fought a bull one time and I lost miserably. And so I can only imagine whatever Butchery was. He's a big, tough dude, man. But him and Steamboat finished up at WrestleMania 4. And they both return with George Scott here at the beginning of his booking here in January of 1989. So clearly both George Scott boys, he made some phone calls and he's going to bring in some other talent too. If you know what I'm talking about, Bubba. Iron Sheik gonna come back and motherfuck and all kinds of good stuff like that. But
yeah, I got to see a Ricky Steamboat title defense against the Iron Sheik in Philadelphia.
Wow,
that was a rough night.
Sheiky baby getting title shots in 19. Well, see what I was talking about, out of touch. But
well, he also brings in Cowboy Bob Orton.
Yes,
he brings Dick Murdoch in, and I think you're going to touch on the other guy pretty soon, so I won't go there yet.
Right. So, but we've just got so many talents. And luckily for us, right before Dusty finishes up, he brings in the original Midnight Express to work with Cornette and his Midnight Express. So that feud's already, we know that's going to go awry here, though, because the story goes, Dennis Condrey goes, okay, we're doing the powers that be, George Scott and Jim Herd that took over, apparently didn't like Randy Rose. Not as a human, they just didn't see it. They didn't get it. They didn't want Randy on their roster. They wanted him kaput. So they do this deal where they're going to do the loser leaves shtick and whatnot with the original Midnights and get rid of Randy. And I guess the story goes, Dennis, who had already abandoned the company once, goes into the booking. And he, a lot of guys don't think like this, but there's a few that do. He goes, what am I doing? What do you mean? Well, Randy's leaving. What am I doing? And they're like, oh, we'll figure that out later. We don't know yet. And that supposedly that's what leads to Dennis walking out again. He's like, well, if they don't have anything for me, and I'm not, I'm a tag team guy here. Like, if they have nothing for me, they don't even have a clue. I'm not going to just be relegated to doing jobs and things. I don't know George Scott that well. And so Dennis, takes a hike again. So that's unfortunate because we had, some fun stuff there. But Great Muta also comes in around this time.
Yeah, which was one of the good moves because another one of George Scott's old buddies actually kind of comes back with Muta in Mr. Gary Hart.
Yeah, they go way back, right? George Scott and Gary Hart. Gary Hart never made it to the World Wrestling Federation, pal. Too many managers there already.
And he didn't want to take that occasional bump. That was only one guy could ever do that. That was Freddie Blassie.
Yeah, that's you weren't getting away with that in New York. And Yeah, Gary Hart wasn't big on taking bumps. That's for sure. But so we walk in here, Clash 6. I'm looking at the results here. April 2nd, Superdome, only drawing 5,300 in the Superdome. Now, business was not on its ass to this level to have only merited 5,300 fans. I think that was one of the main reasons why George Scott got the boot, was he did not promote this. Even clearly, locally, he didn't do a very good job of promoting this event.
No, because, you have the return of somebody that should have been, for New Orleans, should have been a big deal. Mm-hmm. And he was fighting an arch enemy, which should have been a big deal, which should have at least got you a couple thousand more people. But they didn't even push it on TV well enough. No,
not at all. And so with the Midnights, the original Midnights on the outs, enter a new team for Paul E. Dangerously, the Samoan SWAT team coming in. Now, I don't know George Scott's, relationship with Afa and Sika, if that had anything to kind of play on it or whatever the situation was. But the maybe this was a Paul E. call. Paul had the pulse on all of the indie guys. Of course, we know his background with the Samoan family.
It was a Michael Hayes influence.
Okay.
With the SST.
From Dallas. Okay.
From Dallas, when he booked Dallas in '88, and Buddy Roberts. Well, Buddy Rogers was there at the show, but Buddy Roberts was managing the SST during Michael's run down there before Michael returned and later in '88. So it was the Michael Hayes influence with Paulie that got them to into the NWA.
So had you not been watching ESPN, and I watched anything that was wrestling, believe me, it was on in my house, but unfortunate for my grandparents. But the SST, if you didn't know who they were, they introduced them well here by having them go over. This is their first real competitive match. They're working the Midnight Express, Jim Cornette's guys. And so Paulie's new team of the SST going to score a win here. They give them 20 minutes on TV. A good, solid tag team match, and now you've solidified the brand new tag team of Samu and Fatu here in the NWA as credible. They didn't, it makes sense to put the baby faces over, but not when you're just starting to try to heat things up. So obviously the heels are going to go over here.
Right. And for those who don't know, one is Samu, who was Afa's son, who was Samoan number 3 in '83.
Number 3. Samula, as Gorilla called him.
Samula, yes. When Afa broke his leg there. And then they brought Samuel in to, fill in on the house shows. They never did say he was part of the tag team champs, but he did fill in. And then the other Samoan was the twin brother of the Tonga Kid, who wrestled as Tonga Kid 2 in the AWA. And he becomes Fatu here with them. But you all know him better as Jimmy and Jay's dad, Rikishi.
Yeah, Fatu, of course. So Rikishi, yes. Jimmy and Jay, and... Man, that Samoan dynasty thing is a real deal, right? I mean, it started with Afa and Sika, but you see it expand. And yeah, Fatu, twin brother of Tonga Kid, a.k.a. Tama, part of the Islanders there with Haku.
Samoan Savage, who will join them later in the year.
He'll be here later in the year as well. So it's cool to see them here. They'll later be the Head Shrinkers in the early 90s WWF as well, Samu and Fatu, scoring a win over Stan Lane and Beautiful Bobby there. Now here it comes, the Great Muta. The Pearl of the Orient, as Gary Michael Capetta always put it. And I always love that introduction. But great mood out here. He's got Gary Hart as a manager, which is fine. Gary had managed Kabuki. So it only made sense that the Kabuki's quote-unquote son, the Great Muta here, would be under the guidance of Mr. Hart as well. And they're battling Steve Casey, who wrestled as Steve Dane quite a bit there later on for Global Wrestling in Dallas. Had a long-time feud with Chaz. They have the epic bungee cord match. So that was later on in Steve Dane's career. But Steve Dane is basically like a super jacked up version of Stan Lane is the best way I can describe him. But without any of the talent, unfortunately, at this point.
Yeah, but actually, when I was rewatching it, I forgot who Muta was matched up against, and I thought it was Luger for a moment because he's a
big dude.
From behind, he kind of looked like Luger. But what was great about this match, they picked the right guy for him to go, for Muta to go against here, because when he blew that mist and got that in the blonde hair, really, really stood out. So they got that mist over, big time.
Yeah, Muta with the mist. I mean, he did it better than Kabuki, man. And it was always so cool. And people would take those gunshot fire bumps off of it sometimes for Muta. And it just always looked so beautiful. But no, my only problem with this match was it went 8 minutes. And that was about 4 minutes too long. Casey was just too big. and too green to be in there trying to work the style, or the speed, I should say, of the Great Muta, because the Great Muta was working on a speed that nobody had at that point. I don't know that anybody ever saw it again as far as the way he was able to snap off the moves, as crisp as they looked, the handsprings, the way they bounced. He looked like a freaking slinky in there. I've never seen anybody move like the Great Muta before or again.
It's a shame he listened to Gary Hart, down the line,
right?
Because he could have been a mega superstar
yes.
in the United States. Yes, he went on to become mega superstar in Japan, but I'm not bringing Japan into this. But just in the United States, he was so over, and they wanted to turn him babyface, and Gary Hart said, "Oh, that's not good for your career." That's because Gary wouldn't have a spot. And,
right. Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean,
the only thing Gary Hart was good for Muta was not all the time. I'm sure some people don't know out there. In order to blow the mist, it was usually like a condom blown up with food dye in it, and they would have it in their mouth for the whole match, or Gary Hart at ringside would have it, and somewhere along the lines would pass it on to Muta, who then would put it into his mouth. So that was really the only purpose Gary Hart ever served. He was the condom passer.
He was also the mouthpiece. And again, we've talked about late 80s Gary Hart doesn't do anything for me on the mic, but at the same time, Muta speaks no English. So you got to have somebody say something for Muta every once in a great way, especially once he makes that babyface turn. But just imagine, had that not went down, imagine Muta would have been in a perfect position to take Sting's spot with Ric Flair. I'm not saying he had to win the world title, but to take Sting's spot. And then Luger would have never had to make that turn that he was getting over so huge as a heel. So
he was hot as a heel, yes.
And the people wanted to cheer Muta from the get-go. That's why they had to dumb down his offense by the end of the summer. Like, somebody told him finally, like, you got to stop doing this shit, because you're just cheering the hell out of you.
Yeah, they had turned him into his dad, the Greek Kabuki.
Which was unfortunate. Yeah, it was really unfortunate. Okay, here we go. Here's a match that should have been booked in the Superdome about 10 years prior, talking about Junkyard Dog versus Butch Reed. Now, a few years ago, working for the Cowboy, this would have been a main event in the Superdome. In 1989,
and
not so much.
No, not. Poor Butch could barely move at this point, and either could JYD. JYD was, Meltzer called him the junk food dog for a reason. I mean, he was ripped when he entered the WWF in '84, and even he wasn't too bad, even up to the original WrestleMania. But after that, he just, whatever workout regimen he had, he forgot, and he just worked out more, just bending forward with that straw.
Yeah, well, that's you're saying he drank a lot of Coke, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. That's just making sure.
Get the Coke out of the bottle, exactly.
That's right. All right. So, but you look at it and you go, well, there's another George Scott guy. He's over there. Yes. No, the Dog was there before George Scott. The Dog comes in to replace Nikita Koloff at Starrcade. So technically, that was a Dusty hire, or a Crockett hire, maybe. I'm not really sure how that worked, but Dog was gone. I mean, he had just left the WWF. I think it was coming back from that European tour. He and Don Morocco got fired for shenanigans over there, multiple shenanigans, from my understanding, probably involving drinking a lot of beverages and things. And so they get canned on the way back home, and less than a month later, the Dog's here working for the NWA, and now he's working Butch Reed in the Superdome, only it's not 1982, 83, 84 anymore, Dog. And so this was not good, and they gave him 10 minutes, and so that was...
Well, if you remember, JYD, he came in for Starrcade, but Dusty was relieved of duties around Thanksgiving.
You're right.
So I don't know if Scott had been in charge at that point yet, or that might have been a Jim Crockett. Because Crockett,
it could have been a Crockett. Crockett was actually Booker, right
at the sale point. Mm-hmm. He was booking after Dusty, so that might have been a Jim Crockett call. Just bring JYD in, just because of name value alone.
No, that's absolutely a good call. Yeah, Crockett had the book in between Dusty and George Scott getting there. I don't think George got there until the beginning of the year. So Crockett was holding the fort down for the rest of 88 there. Let's see what else we got on the card. Bob Orton. That's right, Daddy. Bob Orton. My goodness. I mean, he wasn't even over in the WWF by the time he left there, And so here's Bob Orton getting a push, scoring a victory over Dick Murdoch here. And Orton is being slapped with the manager as well. Gary Hart. What an odd fit, I thought. Gary Hart and Bob, and they're going to stay together for Bob's little run here till he's told he has the job to somebody he didn't want a job to, and he just walks out of center stage. But Bob Orton and Dick Murdoch get 33 seconds of time here on the TBS, with Orton going over nonetheless.
Well, never let it be said, Dick Murdoch, well, as far as being a good individual, he wasn't as bad as Bob Sweetan, but he wasn't exactly the cleanest guy in the world.
Sure.
But never let it be said that Dick Murdoch wouldn't do something for money.
Yeah, we'll just leave it there. Dickie Murdoch doing the job. Well, they got a feud coming up now. We're going to see Orton and Murdoch feuding, so that was kind of just to prolong all of that good stuff. Also on the card, the Varsity Club now together. Rick Steiner's no longer part of the group, but they do add Dr. Death Steve Williams to the group at this point, so it is Mike Rotunda teaming with Doc. Kevin Sullivan, still the manager, of course, defeating the Road Warriors. So that was a title change, if I remember correctly, and to see the Roadies do a job, lose the belts on free TV, on cable TV, that was insane, man.
That was a real shocker, but, again, don't let it be said they wouldn't do what was best for business. It was the right thing for them to do at the time, to drop the belts. And, it's not like Dr. D and Rotundo were the Midnight Express when it came to size-wise. Yes, I'm sure the Road Warriors respected the Midnight Express, but they wouldn't exactly, without a real screw job ending, ever allow them. Look at Jimmy Garvin and Steve Regal beating them for the AWA belts. It had to be a Michael Hayes screw job.
I'd say there was a lot of respect there between the Roadies, and because let's face it, Rotunda didn't look like a tough guy, but he was a hell of an amateur, and he could stretch you if he needed to in there, and he could handle business. I saw him have to do that a few times. Death Row found out when he messed with Mike Rotunda a few years later after this. But you look, and Doc, I mean, I'm sure there was mutual respect there. I'm not saying Hawk or Animal would have backed down from Doc, but I'm saying everybody would have walked out with some bruises that day. So I don't see them really, shutting down the idea of the title change. It's just very peculiar, but it's different booking because Roadies, remember, they were heels here. Dusty had just turned them heel, and it never worked. It never got over. The crowd didn't want to boo the Road Warriors, but Dusty had turned them on him, and they did the old True Grit gimmick, and they jabbed him in the eye with the spike and tried to turn the Roadies heel. So technically, walking into this match, both teams were heels.
Well, they had done, at the Chi-Town Rumble, didn't they have the Varsity Club attack the Road Warriors either after the match or back in the dressing room or something to start this feud going in order to turn the Roadies back babyface again?
Yeah, they realized
because
Dusty's mistake. Nobody ever booed them solidly. Yeah, you're right. No. And they did it to Dusty, so by this point, a lot of people didn't even care. So you got to find a better guy to sympathize with, right? So, sorry, Dusty.
Well, hey, look at Hawk's. Hawk does an interview right before True Grit after he stabbed him with the pencil. Mm-hmm. During a Road Warrior interview, he has a pencil in his hand. He goes, "Dusty Rhodes, I almost took your eye out, but you're not going to need this anymore." And he breaks the pencil in half.
Wow, the pencil. Symbolic for sure.
Yes.
Wow. All right. So the Road Warrior, but I should mention, this is not done. There's no clean win here, Battle of the Heels here. There's actually a referee getting involved that's going to play a big part in this. He's not going to be a referee for long, though. He's going to become a manager. Teddy Long going to do the heel shtick here and aid the Roadies in this loss. The Varsity Club win the belts, and Teddy Long plays a part in between. So Teddy Long, let me holla at you, playa, basically becomes a heel here. He's Danny Davis.
Yeah, this is his heel turn. Yes.
So we're going to see Teddy thugging and bugging his way through the managerial court on down the road here in 1989. So Ranger Ross, there's another odd pickup. I'm not really sure what the story was with that. I think I read about it once upon a time in the Observer, how or why he got picked. He was working the indie shows in Georgia, local guy, and of course he's a legitimate Army Ranger at one point. Also may have robbed a bank or two on a motorcycle, I hear later on. But hard times, baby, that's what hard times will do to you. But what a matchup here. It's America versus Iran. Wow, the more things change, the more they stay the same, Jamie. USA versus Iran.
Well, you just answered your own question. And at the time, that's what I was told. George Scott wanted to do a USA-Iran feud again for what would be the 10th straight year. It was the 10th anniversary of the hostage taking, so he wanted to, live in the past. And he found a new American hero to go up against the Iron Sheik.
Ranger Ross scoring the win there by disqualification. Just 2 minutes of time there, but aptly put. I mean, I questioned Orton and Murdoch going 33 seconds. I do not question any 1989 Iron Sheik match going 2 minutes, though. That was probably about the right amount of time there. So we'll continue on. Tag team action. The fun-loving team of Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert teaming with his good old buddy from the UWF days, Rick Steiner. Missy Hyatt out there with Eddie. They're going to be defeating the other half of the Varsity Club. That's Dan Spivey, who had just joined the company, just joined the Varsity Club. Spivey and Kevin Sullivan. Now, this one's for the U.S. tag titles, and Gilbert and Steiner are the U.S. tag team champions, so they retain.
Yeah, boy, did Spivey look a lot tougher with this hairdo than he did when he had the Barry Windham bangs and stuff, and they were trying to pass him off as fake Barry Windham there for a while in the WWF. But yeah, Spivey looked like a monster, and another guy that probably should have been much bigger than in this business than he eventually was, but a lot of that had to do with his knees.
So, again, another match. They're building to the main event, which is going to be Flair and Steamboat. They know how long they want him to go. They got to give him time. So these guys are just out there to fill the time, which isn't very long. They give them about 4 minutes to do a tag team match. But these guys are making it where they went long on the matches early on, which is probably the bad call. Because, I mean, some of the early matches could have went shorter and these could have went a little longer. I wouldn't have complained, but it is what it is. And right now we're doing Eddie and Rick Steiner together for the moment. Unfortunately, Rick Steiner's coming off the big boom, Jamie. I mean, he made the babyface turn. There was talk of Dusty trying to power play into Flair dropping the belt to Rick,
title,
Starrcade, and all these things. And that's kind of like Flair going back to Turner and protesting, hey, man, he can't do this, and et cetera. And that probably played a little part in Dusty being removed from the book as well. But Rick Steiner was that over. I'm not saying he deserved that title shot. I'm not saying he had been built up to that title shot, but I'm saying had you just been watching TV and not expected it, and then with the rumor was it was going to go like 3 minutes, like boom, 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 and then surprise, belly to belly, pin, and Rick Steiner's your champion. I think the crowd would have came out unglued. I think they would have exploded out of their seats.
Yeah, they tripped into him as happens every now and then. His turn to him face just elevated him, and
crowd loved it.
Fans, the crowd loved it. I mean, he was a comedy figure, but he was a comedy figure with legit background.
Oh man,
you could just tell he was a badass.
But he didn't know it, right? That was the gimmick. Like he
right.
Could, it's like Lenny from the old of Mice and Men kind of, or something like that. He'd squeeze you and hug
and
you
Kevin
and call
Sullivan
you.
just picked on him.
Yeah, he sure did, and Rotunda, of course.
And Rotunda, right?
Going back and watching this as I did on the Grenade, the early episodes of the Grenade, you watch how quickly. I mean, it takes how many months, how many weeks does it take to just kill somebody dead? Apparently 3, because as hot and over as Rick Steiner was in January of '89, by this point, really cooled off. And he was still fun. He was still a great character. I think Scott Steiner saved Rick because Rick was going nowhere. They basically killed this heat, all of this stuff that Dusty had built, Rick had built, the fans, the organic way that they accepted Rick, they just killed it dead. It was like George Scott walked in, and you know how it works, JB. We talk about it all the time, the change of the bookers. They don't see it. They change things. Rather than let something happen because it's good for business, it's not on my dime. I didn't invent that. I didn't create that, so I don't like that. And we're shutting it down. And they stick Rick with Eddie Gilbert, which I'm fine with, the duo, hanging out and Eddie being the mouthpiece and all that good stuff. But Rick was really coming along as a singles, and they just take the TV title belt back off of him and stick him in a tag team, and they really don't do much with him at all until Scott comes around in the summer. Right.
And you know what? When Scott debuted, I know we're talking earlier, but when Scott debuts, I had seen him in the WWA, and I knew he was good, but when he got to the NWA, man, I really thought he had chances of being the future of the NWA when he first arrived with those power moves that he could do, through the air, and he was real impressive. And yes, he saved Rick's career because Rick probably would have just wandered off and been a mid-card something in the WWF at some point.
And I'm not saying Scott Steiner was the Steiner brothers. I mean, it took both of those guys.
But
they had just done nothing with Rick for so many months. Everything he had built up just went away. And you see that happen to a lot of guys over and over. It's going to happen to Mike Rotunda. And as over as he got in that Varsity Club, they don't know what they're going to do with him here in the latter half of '89. He becomes essentially just another guy on the card. And eventually the team captain of the Varsity Club becomes a boat captain because
Captain Mike.
They have no idea what the hell they're doing with him. That shows you how quickly somebody can just fall off a cliff if they got nothing for you and they're not going to support you. It does take the machine to some degree to get you over. But it might not take a whole lot of the machine to help these next two gentlemen in the main event. 2 out of 3 falls, NWA World Heavyweight title on the line. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, now the champion, having defeated Ric Flair on the last pay-per-view. Steamboat taking on the Nature Boys. So you come back from watching Hogan Savage, and now you get to come home and watch Flair and Steamboat. Man, what a night for Jammie Ward.
Oh, yeah. And like I said, I was up until what was this, a 3.5 hour show, something like that. I was up until the wee hours of the morning watching this.
So these guys go 2 out of 3 falls. This is a lot of people have their favorites. I've seen a lot of people say the first of the 3 matches between these, the trilogy, if you will, is their favorite, and they'll die on that hill. This was mine. You get 3 matches for the price of 1, and every match gets about 20 minutes, roughly 20 minutes each. So every match gets its own story, and every match has its own story. They're completely different from one another. And it was just such a fantastic time to sit down and be able to watch this. And we called it a long time ago in audio form on a very old bonus show on the Patreon. But we're going to come back and bring this part of the big ones and do this on the video cast soon. But for right now, man, take me back. Flair and Steamboat, the feud, just your memories of this whole entire time.
Yeah, well, I had heard, of course, that Steamboat was coming in. He was going to be the Mr. X partner for... Eddie Gilbert at the time on Saturday night. And then I believe he pinned Wyndham in that match because it was Flair and Wyndham against Steamboat and Eddie Gilbert. I did not know that he was beating Flair for the belt on that show. Dennis Coralluzzo didn't know. And him and Jim were big friends. Jim didn't let him in on that. But
some things you got to keep secret.
Yeah, some things you got to keep secret. So... Steamboat wins it the first one, and now this is the second one of the trilogy. I actually preferred the third one, the Wrestle War match, as my own personal favorite. But just the build up and the rivalry, and they made it known that Steamboat and Flair had a great history, and this wasn't their first rodeo, and it was the one guy that Ric Flair could never get that definitive victory. Or yes, he beat Ricky Steamboat, but he never. Steamboat took him to the limit every single time. Yeah. And so this was the best feud that Ric Flair had since Jim Crockett Promotions went national. I don't think Dusty, Ronnie Garvin, Magnum TA, Nikita Koloff, none of those guys took Ric Flair to the level that he went to in this match. He just went all out in all 3 matches.
Yeah, it was some of his best stuff ever, really. People always reference this for good reason, man. It's Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat. What else? They had their feuds, going all the way back to the 1970s and George Scott booking in Crockett way back when. The very young Ricky Steamboat, of course, they were feuding over the U.S. title and things of that nature way back at that time. But now they've both matured. They're both world championship caliber material now. Ric Flair held the belt many a times by this point. Steamboat now the champion. He's proven that he's on the equal level as Ric Flair, just as we remembered way back when these two were competing. And so they have this match here, but it ends very peculiar. Well, of course, it's 1 fall apiece, so we go into our 3rd fall. And the match goes about 55 minutes. They give them an hour. These guys go 55 minutes of sheer entertainment, by the way, guys. Go check it out if you haven't already. I'm sure it's out there somewhere on YouTube or something. But Jamie, why don't you tell them a little bit about that finish, the 3rd fall?
That finish is, it's your typical double pin thing. Steamboat, rear
that double chicken wing thing, I think they called it.
Yeah, had him like in a double chicken wing and kind of suplexes Flair back, and Steamboat obviously lifts his shoulder, before the 3 count. But also obvious from the camera angle, Flair had his leg underneath the rope. But referee Tommy Young doesn't see it, counts to 3. Ricky Steamboat's declared the winner. Jim Ross and Terry Funk, who are basically sitting right in front of where the pin was made. They said, Flair's complaining his leg was under the rope, so we didn't see anything. And then they show 1 or 2 replays where you can't, bad production values here. They show the 2 side views where you can't see the leg outside the ring. And then finally, they show the view from the view that they had during the match, where the leg was obviously out of the ring. So that part was bad, the Terry Funk and Jim Ross part of it. But it's still a great finish because it allows for match number 3 to occur, because this one ends in controversial circumstances.
Right. So Flair gets his foot under the rope. He can argue that. And, of course, eventually Steamboat going to give in and give him that final rematch, the final countdown. Awesome video, by the way. Awesome video for any wrestling video, much less frickin' 1989 NWA. So I always love that one. Great build-up, great fight feel there for that.
And, Steamboat, after the match, when Jim Ross is interviewing him, he insists, I don't think the leg was outside. And you know what? Ric Flair's behind me now. There's a lot of other great challengers in the NWA, and it's time for me to move on and meet other challengers. And then Jim Ross gets it in the head and says, "Oh, Rick, I think we have a view of it." And Rick says, "Oh, yeah, it did. That is what happened there. I guess we'll have to talk about this."
All right, Jamie, I'm going to take you to the other side. We're not going to run through the whole card because we're going to be covering that extensively over the next couple episodes of The Grenade, talking about WrestleMania 5. But I do want to hit on a couple things with you. And I know one thing stuck out near and dear to you, and I wanted to make sure we got that in here this week. Tell me your memories about the return of Roddy Piper to the World Wrestling Federation, the epic segment with Brother Love and Morton Downey Jr., but just in general, man, whatever you want to share, please do so with us.
Not just because it was Atlantic City, but I went there to see my man, the guy that I've been a fan of since, 1981 when he showed up in Georgia, Roddy Piper return. Because I really thought it was the end of Roddy Piper. After he beat Adrian Adonis, I thought he was going to become real successful and big in Hollywood and we would never see him again. But when they announced that he was going to come back and be with that jerk Morton Downey Jr.,
I think about all the times on Regional Wrestling we've talked about your love for the Hot Rod, and so I had to imagine this was a big deal for Jammie Ward to be there for the return of Roddy Piper to pro wrestling after 2 years away.
That was the whole reason I wanted to go. I wanted to see Roddy Piper. Yes, I wanted to see Hulk and Savage, and I wanted Savage to win. Of course, we'll talk about that some other time. Mm-hmm. But when that music started to play for Roddy Piper, that was the loudest in 2 shows that I ever hear the convention center in Atlantic City be that loud. It was just stupendous. And then, the interview segment with Morton Downey Jr. and Downey's acting like a real ass with the cigarette and blows the smoke in Piper's face, and he gets the fire extinguisher out and blows it on him. Just awesome stuff. That's the Roddy Piper I wanted to see.
Yeah, that's classic Hot Rod returns. Of course, it's crystal clear right out of the gate. He's going to be a baby face. And upon return, that was an excellent call because I don't know if anybody was going to boo Roddy Piper's return to pro wrestling. He goes and makes They Live. It's a box office success, surprisingly, because a lot of people didn't expect that to happen. But he doesn't really have any other hits after that. So after 2 years, he kind of packs it in. I mean, he remains in Hollywood. He continues to make movies and things like that. But
Hell goes to Frogtown.
Yes, I saw that on USA back in the 90s one time. I said, what the hell is this? What a premise.
And him and Jesse did that pilot.
Tag team, yes. I saw that in 1990. I was like, why is this not a TV show? Of course, I was a wrestling mark, but,
It would have got over on USA Network if they had premiered there.
Yes, if they showed their own television programming back then, that would have been It
could have been like Silk Stockings. It had been on after Raw.
There you go. It
wouldn't have been as dirty, but it would have been a good show there after Monday Night Raw.
Wouldn't have been as fun then. But, but, the fun way they open that up, and I'll try to refresh your memory a little bit, they hit Piper's music, and the Fink builds it up without announcing Roddy Piper, though. He is one of the greatest of all time, blah, 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 blah. And then they pan out, and it's Brother Love in a kilt, or a skirt, as Piper points out, it's a skirt.
Okay.
So Brother Love comes out, and he interviews himself, but he's doing Roddy Piper, because Bruce Pritchard loves to do the Roddy Piper. Both Pritchards love to do the Roddy Piper.
I was just about to say, Tom has been doing Roddy Piper since 1982.
So Brother Love sitting there interviewing himself as Roddy Piper, blah, blah, blah. And then Morton Downey Jr. comes out. They talk for a minute or two back and forth. They don't get along. And so then finally, here comes Hot Rod. And according to Bruce, Roddy runs Brother Love off, rips the skirt off. It's not a kilt. It was a skirt on Brother Love. And Brother Love runs off in his little red underwear. And that was the end of the segment as far as Bruce had control of it. Because, Bruce was working backstage. And from there, Roddy and Morton go completely off script. And they prolong I guess it was like 2 more minutes of material. And they turned it into like 10 more minutes of material. These guys just going back and forth, ad-libbing with each other. And all the cigarette smoke and everything. Obviously, the finish was planned. I mean, fire extinguisher was underneath the seat. So Piper picks up the thing and gives him the hose, literally. And down goes Morton Downey. But that was a fun segment. I mean, yeah, it does run a little long. And as a 9-year-old, there was some things said there that went over my head. Like, I didn't understand the jokes between Piper and Downey at the time. But it was still a classic, memory from my childhood, that Piper's Pit. Because I was a Brother Love fan. So to see Piper and Brother Love out there at the same time, that was so cool for me.
Yeah, it was for me, too. And, about a month before that, I had the opportunity to go with Dennis Coralluzzo and Tom Robinson up to the Morton Downey taping where they had Jim Wilson on and Lou Albano and all those guys. But unfortunately, I wasn't able, to go. So Mort was already, his show was wrestling if you really think about it. It's very similar to Jerry Springer that would follow up, where all those shows were.
Yeah, it's entertainment, pal.
Right, it was entertainment. So Mort was made for wrestling.
I think so.
It was the right guy to have on because Mort was at the height of his popularity or fame, whatever you want to call it.
Whatever you want to call that, whatever that was at that point.
He was burned out quickly, but he was the originator of all that trash TV.
Trash TV, yeah, he was. He really was. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I agree with that for television. Yes. Maybe not for radio, but certainly for television. And all right, we're going to close this thing on a high note. We're going to talk about just one other match. I guess you probably figure out which one it is. The Mega Powers Explode. Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan. Of course, the story, Lovely Elizabeth stating that she's going to be in a neutral corner. She doesn't even want this match to happen. She hates to see it, but she hopes nobody gets hurt. And now the madness has become the madness once again. This is classic Randy Savage. The promos, the eyes. I've taken multiple pictures. I mean, I believe that he gets in you hear about actors and, they get into their character before they go on the set. And I feel like Randy Savage really honed this character very well for this story because the eyes of the madness don't lie when he starts cutting these promos, man.
I believe he lived that 24/7 in my mind because he was that deep into character, as you just said. I mean,
method acting 101.
Yes. If you didn't know what wrestling was at that point, you'd swear that he was legit. And a lot of people I know that I never met Savage, but a lot of people I know that did meet him say he was a nice guy, but he was still out there.
Yeah, I think we've heard that from every era, from the ICW days moving forward. Luckily, he was able to restrain himself and work the main events here in the WWF and earn himself a hell of a living and WCW for that matter later on. But there was still always some kind of, the paranoia and everything else that goes on with Randy Savage. But my goodness, what a story and what a long telling story going back to the fall of 1987 and the Mega Powers uniting and Savage kind of taking over for Hogan while Hogan goes off to film No Holds Barred in 88. Savage running with the title from WrestleMania 4 all the way through the summer there, defending against DiBiase and Andre. Hogan returns at SummerSlam and then he, gets a little handsy with Liz and then we're off to the races as far as the storytelling goes.
Yeah, you're right. SummerSlam, he got the side eye when the Hulk lifts her up in her little skirt that...
Putting his hands on her no-nos.
The bikini bottom that Jesse Ventura, like he'd never seen a woman in a bikini bottom before.
What is that? Terry never wore that for me.
So, yeah, it was great storytelling right up to the explosion. Even if Hulk said, all right, am I on yet? Right before the camera split to him in the back.
Yeah, checking for the tiz eye, man. Yes.
But they told a great story. I wanted... of course, the Macho Man to win that because I was anti-Hulk Hogan by this point. I was just tired of him. I wanted DiBiase to win the belt the year before, but there was no problem with that. DiBiase-Savage feud was actually very well done. But I did not want to see Hogan with another reign, and fortunately it only lasted a year before the Ultimate Warrior would wind up beating
that's right,
Hogan. But still, you know what? The crowd just went ballistic for Hogan. And when he walked out with the belt, it wasn't loud as Piper, but it was, 1A and A, right?
Yeah.
Right there together.
Yeah, I mean, hell, you're talking about the return of Roddy. But it's kind of funny that the departure, the farewell of Piper takes place on Hogan and Andre. And now you have the Mega Powers exploding, which, I mean, yes, a lot of people won't put it up to Andre because it was Andre and Hulk and it was 93,000 and it was, it was epic at the time and everything like that. But there was never a story told longer or better, I don't think, than the Mega Powers story. I mean, from the seeds, from the uniting, going all the way back, that the first mega handshake way back in like October of 1987. And here we are a year and a half later, and now they've split. And Randy Savage is the same guy we knew he was a year and a half ago before they shook hands. And so it all comes to explode, I guess you could say, here at WrestleMania 5. And they have, they go 20 some minutes, something like that. And they have a fun.
To show you how important that handshake was, I have two buddies that I worked with at the post office that to this day they do the
mega handshake
of the Mega Power shake. They're shaking the hands before they. Oh yeah,
I like it.
They still do it to this day. That's how impactful that moment was for them, and they're not hardcore fans like you and I. They're your casual fans that just like wrestling. But that was what, with them.
But that was the thing. That was this super. I mean, this really was above normal wrestling fandom. Was the Mega Powers deal? I mean, I've said it multiple times. There were kids at school at the time that paid attention to this that they never even mention. I didn't even know they'd watched wrestling. There were family members that I had that wanted to know what happened, and they didn't really follow wrestling, but they followed this Macho Man, Hulk Hogan, Elizabeth story to some degree. It was the soap opera or whatever you want to call it. And I remember my dad, who at the time lived down in Tampa or Miami, I think it was Tampa at the time, and him telling me that it was after WrestleMania, but they did the follow-up matches, Hulk and Savage at the house shows. And he didn't follow wrestling really, but he went there because he wanted to see Hulk Hogan versus Macho Man with Elizabeth at ringside. I mean, it was just drawing in people that weren't necessarily like me and you, like super fans or whatever. So right. It was huge for the WWF, this story between the Macho Man and Randy Savage. And people don't realize that Savage goes into this match, might not have even should have been working this match. He goes in with he had just had a staph infection, very bad fever. He hadn't been working a lot. They'd taken him off the road. He had missed some TV tapings going into this, and there was some doubt. I don't think Randy had any doubt, but I think that there was some doubt somewhere that, can this guy go? Will he get in there? Can he do this? Because it was dangerous for him to get. And that's why I think a lot of people overlook the fact that Randy has his arm wrapped up in this match. So you got Randy Savage, no shocker there. He's going to do it again in 95 with a bad arm, torn tricep, I think. But he's just going to go out there and work right through it, because this is the biggest money, no doubt in my mind. Maybe with the Slim Jim deal later on, something changes, but through his WWF run, I have no doubt he never made any more money than he did right here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody knew Hogan was going to win the belt back, but I don't think there was as much buzz about a WrestleMania match between smart fans, regular fans, until Cody Roman Reigns 2 years ago at WrestleMania 40.
Sure, that sounds right.
In Philadelphia. I mean, as far as people getting invested in the storyline as much as this storyline, there might be ones that I'm looking over for the other.
Well, that's a lot of years in between. So yeah,
35 WrestleManias.
Right.
But just as important storylines, Hulk Andre, Hulk Macho, and then Cody and Roman Reigns. That's the three biggest storylines probably in my time. Yeah, you had Rock and Austin, but I don't think that generated what those three storylines did.
Yeah, I mean, that was more about the names, right? It was just the names. They're Rock and Austin. They were at the peak. They were going to sell no matter what you did or didn't do with them. I mean, it was just a great time for the business. I mean, financially. So right place, right time. And I'm not knocking those guys. Those guys were the reason they were in the financial situation they were in, with a little help from Vince there on camera too. But no, you go back and you talk about the biggest stories, certainly of my childhood growing up. Those Hulk and Andre and Hulk and Savage, even though I was a Warrior Mark to the end, and when he won that belt, there was nobody happier on earth than I. I mean, there was a little build, but there was no build like this. There was no animosity and hatred and all this backstory of Elizabeth and just everything that goes on with it, and years of, Randy Savage being an asshole before they became buddies. And now, Savage was, dick all along. We just didn't realize and all this good stuff. So it culminated here. And they'll continue to have their issues. We're going to see, Savage bring in a new manager, in fact, right after WrestleMania. It was actually filmed at WrestleMania. You want to talk about that real quick before we go?
Yeah, right. It's the best. This feud is the best thing that ever happened to one sensational Sherry Martel, because she winds up being Macho Man's female supporter, and all us fans would have been deprived of the talent of Sherry
Yeah.
Martel.
Wow.
Whoever made the decision to hook her up with Randy Savage.
That's a
didn't make
huge
that
decision because Sherry had just been working Rockin' Robin for the past year or so. I mean, no TV time, no television matches, no promos to talk about, and then randomly to just throw
Peggy
her.
Sue.
Yeah, Peggy Sue.
Peggy
right?
Sue with the honky tonk.
And I really think that was just to justify paying her, putting her on the payroll.
Probably
Give her something else to do while we're not doing women's matches. So she was doing that for a few months. So yeah, good call there with the Peggy Sue. Whatever they gave her, she took and she ran with it. And I think that's what kept her around this long. But Randy Savage is a high profile figure, and he's got his own ways he likes things. So for him to agree to it, and for the WWF to, they must have saw something in Sherry behind the scenes to go, she's got it. This is gonna work, because that's a hell of a risk to take, but it works. And off to the races we go after this, and we'll see, Zeus come in, and what we'll do, get to all that as we go through the summer of 1989. But it's just a hell of a fun ride back in time with you, Jamie, to go back and talk about this epic day. This is one of the biggest days in wrestling because it features two of the biggest events on the same day.
And kind of changes the course of wrestling after this.
Yeah, for George Scott, certainly.
The NWA takes off.
Yes, it does.
I mean, they're going to have another solid 10 months before
the Funker's coming, man.
The Funker's coming in. It's just going to be, as you said, you covered this already in the Grenade. It's 10 months of the greatest wrestling episodic television that you could ever watch. I highly recommend anybody go out and get those tapes and watch all that, or off the WWE Network. I had every single one of the 1989 shows recorded, and I sold it off in my tape collection. But when I was selling tapes, that and the 86 UWF was the two most requested things that I got, was the 89
that's another good
NWA.
reason. That was some good stuff.
And that McMahon, this doesn't slow him down any. He's just going to keep on chugging along. I mean, even the federal government couldn't shut down Vince McMahon in his own words.
Right. Well, after the fact, he talked a big game.
Fact.
Yes, exactly. During which he had a neck brace, but that's another story, another time. But God bless Vince McMahon. I don't even know why I said that. I'm going to get a lot of detractors for that one, but what a character. I will say that much for him. But we're going to wrap it up here this week, guys. We go back and tell the story of April 2nd, 1989. The Mega Powers explode at WrestleMania 5, Clash of the Champions 6. And it had nothing to do with the war. Well, it kind of had something to do with the war between the WWF and Turner, but at the same time, it was the cable companies who made the call there. They made the call to Ted Turner and said, hey, we need a pay-per-view to go up against Vince. We're going to shut him down. We're done with him. And Vince goes, oh, okay, let's talk things over. And obviously, WrestleMania 5 goes off without a hitch. Mega Powers explode. Everybody, all is right in the world. Meanwhile, over there in Crockett Land, I think they draw a 4.3 for the Clash, and that was pretty much the end of the deal there for George Scott at that point. He was at the end of the rope as it was. And so George Scott's gone. We got the booking committee coming in. It's going to be a fun time. Terry Funk coming through. The Great Muda's there. 1989 was a hell of a time. I encourage anybody to go back, listen to the first, say, 35, 36 episodes of The Grenade if you want to hear the NWA side of 1989. We continue to tell the WWF side now, and it's a blast. And Jamie, I'm looking forward to having you back next week as we kick off the definitive edition of WrestleMania 5. Going to introduce Jamie at the top of the show. He's going to kick off the program with, we do have several special guests coming through to talk various matches throughout the night, so stay tuned for the next 2 episodes of The Grenade. It's going to be a fantastic ride back to WrestleMania 5.
I'm looking forward to it, Ray.
Appreciate you, Jamie. Thanks for being here, man.
My pleasure.